We're in Genesis 2:1. Where in Hebrew it says something like, these are the generations of the heaven and the earth, or these are the products of the heaven and the earth. The Hebrew word there is toldolt, often translated generations. When it's about to tell you all of someone's descendants, all the people they generated, it'll say these are the toldolt of that person. And it's spelled two different ways. It's spelled two different ways in the Torah. Sometimes it's spelled with two vavs, sometimes it's spelled with one vav, because the vowels in Hebrew aren't necessarily obvious from just reading the Hebrew letters, right? So there are Hebrew letters that sort of tell you that the vowel could be there or is there, but not necessarily which one. I mean, there's some correlations. The vav could be like an u sound, or it could be like an o sound. The actual sound that it makes, you have to already know as you're reading the Torah. You have to know how to pronounce the word as you're reading the Torah scroll. To help with people who may not know, usually outside of a Torah scroll, or often the Torah or different Hebrew literature is printed with nikudot. Nikudot are little dots that go, dots and dashes around the letter. They give a hint to the pronunciation. So once you have those, you could be a little more, it doesn't matter whether you have the vav there. If you have the nikudot around where the vav would be, you still know how to pronounce it. And you recognize the word without the vav there. With the vav there, if you don't have the nikudot, if you don't have the dots, it's a bigger clue that there's a vowel there, and it's a bigger clue as to what vowel it will be. It's a little bit complicated, but so you can make this O sound in toldolt. You can make it a couple ways. You can make it with the vav, and then the nikudot would have the holem over the vav to tell you it's an O sound, toldolt. Or you can drop the vav and have the holem over the tav, toldolt, same pronunciation, but you just drop the actual Hebrew letter. The meaning is the same, spelling is different, and every little difference, the rabbis would like an explanation. Why is this word spelled differently here? The pronunciation is the same, the meaning is the same. Why is the spelling different? They're both valid ways to spell the word, but why would the Torah choose two different ones? So the pattern looks like this. The first time the word toldolt shows up in the Torah, it's right here in our verse, Genesis 2:1. These are the products of the heaven and the earth, and it's spelled with both vowels. It's got two vowels, so it's a little longer. It's 6 letters long. And then if you go all the way through, the next time you find it spelled completely is when it's talking about the generations of Peretz in Ruth 4:18. This is part of the genealogy of the Messiah. David comes from line of Peretz. That's where we find out David's genealogy. And there it's spelled with two vowels. Everywhere in between is spelled with only one. It's missing a letter. It's missing a letter. Why is it missing a letter? Why is it lacking a vav? Well, what's the numerical value of the letter vav? Does anyone know? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. 6. So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi said this: the missing vav in between all the two that are complete, spelled completely, the missing vav and all those defectively spelled toldolt represents 6 things that God took away from Adam after he sinned. And then, of course, to have it spelled completely at the end of the sequence hints that all 6 things are going to come back. So they were there at the beginning before the sin, and then the descendant of David, right, will bring them back. But in between, we're in the in-between time now, and these 6 things are missing. What are the 6 things that are missing? The radiance of his face, Adam's face, his height, his life, the fruits of the lands. He was driven out of the Garden of Eden. The light of the sun and the moon was diminished. Now it's going to bring proof verses for each of those 6 things. How do we know that he took away the radiance of Adam's face? Well, it's Job 14:20, which says, "You change his countenance, then sent him away." So the rabbi says, this is midrashically, interpret this as referring to changing Adam's countenance. Adam had a glorious and splendorous countenance, it glowed, but God diminished that after Adam's sin. How do we know that he diminished Adam's height? They get this from Psalm 139, verse 5, which says, "From the rear and the front you have restricted me." So Adam used to be, if you read other midrashim, you find that Adam was the size of the universe. He was as tall as the universe, as wide as the universe. So he existed at, we think of like for someone who looks just like us in a literal garden, but the midrashim read it as is quite different. He was a sort of angelic being, existed at a much higher spiritual plane that we wouldn't really understand. How do we know that he took away his life? He didn't get eternal life. Well, because he's dead. It says, "For had he merited it, he would have lived eternally." If Adam hadn't had his eternal life taken away, he would have eternal life. He'd be walking among us. How do we know that God took away the fruits of the ground? Because of the verse Genesis 3:17, where God literally says, "Cursed is the ground because of you." How do we know he was driven from the garden? But similarly, in verse 24 of chapter 3, it just tells us that he was driven from the garden. He banished Adam from the garden. How do we know that the sun and the moon, their light was diminished? Well, it says in Isaiah 13:10, "The sun will become dark when it rises." This again, midrashically refers to something that happened in the past, the sun being darker than it should have been. I think the original context has to do with in the future, the sun will be darkened on the day of judgment, something like that. But again, a midrash will take a verse out of the context and say it's hinting at some other phenomenon. So in the future, the Holy One blesses, he will restore all these 6 things. How do we know? Well, how do we know that he's going to restore the radiance of his face? And again, this is Adam sort of stands in for everybody. So it's going to be the radiance of everybody's faces, all of the righteous anyway. So Isaiah 61:9 says, "All who see them will recognize them." So it must be something different about the way they look. Well, the radiance of the face must come back. From where do we know that he will restore his height? For it is written in Leviticus 26:13, "I shall lead you with your head held high." Now, if you take a close look at the Hebrew word there that's translated with your head held high, it looks like the root there is the word for 100 cubits, and then it's plural. So more than one of a measurement that is 100 cubits. So the rabbi says 200 cubits, be 200 cubits tall. It's pretty tall.
So what's the reason why they're talking about the tallness? I mean, Adam, man's representing, or Adam's representing man, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is, people used to be great big creatures. Again, according to some midrashim, Adam filled the universe. He was tall as the universe. And we're now small and insignificant physically. So wouldn't it be great if you were just, 300 feet tall, do whatever you want?
It would.
Of course, everyone else is going to be 300 feet tall. So
Right, so you're just
back to square one. You could punt a dinosaur though, being that tall. You could do quite a bit.
Oh,
From where do we know that eternal life will be restored? When Isaiah 65:22, the lifetime of my people will be like the lifetime of the tree. Now, Midrash Rabbah interprets that verse that the tree is referring to the Torah. So the Torah is often called the tree of life based on Proverbs 3:18. The Torah is a tree of life, Torah will grab hold of it. So the lifetime of the tree is the lifetime of the Torah, and the Torah is eternal. So they see this Isaiah 65:22 as a hint that people will also have eternal life. There's a few dots to connect there, but how do we know the fruits of the ground will be restored? Well, this comes from Ezekiel 47:12. I think it's in Revelation 2, the tree of life. By the stream on its bank from either side will grow every kind of food tree. Its leaf will not wither and its fruit will not end. It will ripen in months. What does that mean? Every month it will yield different fruit, new fruit, different kinds of fruit. The fruits of this month will not be like the fruits of another month, but will be new. How do we know that the Garden of Eden will be restored? They get this from Hosea 14:8. Those who dwell in his shade will return. They will revive like grain and blossom like a vine. How do we know the sun and the moon will be restored to their former brightness? They get this from Isaiah 30:26. The light of the moon will be like the light of the sun, and the light of the sun will be 7 times as strong as the light of 7 days. And it's written in Judges, let those who love him be like the powerfully rising sun. So if you do the math, the righteous who love him will in the future glow with the brightness of 343 times as much as the powerfully rising sun. On the day that Hashem bandages the injury of his people and heals the wound of his blow, he will heal the wound of the world. And that's quoting Isaiah 30:26 again. So all these things will be restored. Will be bright, the sun will be bright. Now in Revelation, it says we won't need the sun eventually. So maybe this is talking about an intermediate period, or maybe it's wrong. Who knows? Okay, so after I think this is after Genesis 3:22 is the next verse the Midrash comments on. So the Midrash Tanchuma skips forward quite a bit. So this is after they eat the fruit, I think, where God says, indeed, man has become unique. Man has become as one of us, right? Yeah. In reference to this verse that the Midrash says, Ecclesiastes 7:29 says, see, only this one alone have I found. God made man straight. A better translation might be upright. God made man to be upright, to be righteous. And the connection there, I guess, is this idea of being unique. Being like God in the sense that we were created righteous and upright. So the Holy One, blessed is he who is called righteous and straight, created man in his image, only so that he should be righteous and straight like him. And if you ask, why did he create the Yetzer Hara? Why did he create the evil inclination? And about which it is written, for the inclination of man is evil from his youth, in Genesis 8:21. You say that it's evil, so who can make it good? So the problem is, the Midrash has stated God made us good, he made us righteous, upright like him. But then you might ask, well, it doesn't feel like it. We got this evil inclination in there. It wants to do bad stuff. How does that make sense? The Holy One, blessed is he, says, you made it evil. Right? So there seems to be an idea here that the Yetzer Hara doesn't make you evil. Somehow you make the Yetzer Hara evil. So what is the meaning of this? It doesn't explain it completely here, but what you find in Jewish literature is the Yetzer Hara is not inherently evil. You know, it's given for a specific reason. It's given so that you shouldn't listen to it. And if you don't listen to the Yetzer Hara, you get a reward, an eternal reward for not listening to the Yetzer Hara, for doing the right thing, even with the Yetzer Hara telling you to do the wrong thing. If you didn't have the Yetzer Hara, it wouldn't be very difficult to do what is right. You would automatically do what's right, but you wouldn't get a reward for it because you're doing it automatically. There's no fight. It doesn't take any effort. The Yetzer Hara makes it harder to do what's right, but then you get a reward afterward when you die, or come back from the dead. But when you listen to the Yetzer Hara, that's when it becomes a problem. You weren't supposed to listen to it. When you listen to it, that means that's when evil begins there.
Would that be in the lines of that's where you have a choice?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Right, so if you remember from Nachmanides, before Adam ate the fruit, he just did whatever came to his head to do was the right thing to do. He never thought of doing the wrong thing. It wouldn't have occurred to him. But after eating the fruit, he has now this Yetzer Hara. So he's got, like, I kind of want to do this, but I kind of want to do that too. You have to make the choice. You have the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination and the evil inclination.
So was that made when he made us? I mean, that was
so Nachmanides, Ramban said that it came about when he ate the fruit. And this verse is right after they eat the fruit. But the Midrash here, it's talking about creating the evil inclination. So it's not clear as to whether this Midrash is saying that it was there from the beginning or whether it came about after he ate the fruit. But either way, it seems like God is arguing, again, midrashically, this is a midrash. It's not, you can't always take these things literally, but God is saying that we make the Yetzer Hara evil. It's not necessarily evil in itself. And the sort of more naturalistic explanation of that idea, you can find there's another tradition that the men of the Great Assembly, I think it was after the first temple was destroyed, if I remember right. No, it was after that. It was because it was the Great Assembly. So it was a little bit after that, when the first temple was being rebuilt. The second temple was being built. The men of the Great Assembly said, we gotta make it so we don't sin as much. So they all got together and asked God to get rid of the Yetzer Hara. Get rid of the Yetzer Hara. God said, all right. And then for the next 3 days, none of the chickens in Israel laid any eggs. So they said, Yetzer Hara kind of makes some things happen, right? Like there wouldn't be very many people if you didn't have the will to procreate. The will to procreate comes from the Yetzer Hara. It leads to all kinds of sin. But it also leads to creating new people. The Yetzer Hara is what makes you hungry and you want to go get some food. So the Yetzer Hara sort of keeps you alive. The problem is when you go too far, you go outside the prescribed boundaries of what you're supposed to do. Eat too much, drink too much. You try to procreate with people you're not supposed to, and once you go outside those bounds, it becomes evil. But within certain restrictions, the Yetzer Hara sort of keeps you alive. But that's not what this Midrash is saying. It's just another angle that I've seen on the Yetzer Hara and how it's not inherently evil. The Holy One, blessed is, he says, you made it evil. Why? For a child of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 does not sin, but only from the age of 10 and up. And from then on, he breeds an evil inclination. This is so technically true, right? Because you can't sin until you're bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. A child is by definition righteous because the commands of the Torah don't apply to children. So they can't break any commandments, so they're righteous. You wouldn't necessarily come to that conclusion by watching them. But it's sort of a technicality. But again, if you wanted to provide a better explanation than that, you might say, oh, children are too dumb to know that what they're doing is wrong. You haven't really developed the empathy that kind of comes later. First, you start out real selfish and you just want what you need. Around the age of bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, you start thinking, oh, other people want the same thing too. So if I take it all, there's none for anyone else, and that's not good. Felt that ability to understand right and wrong a little better. All right, now, like, what if you ask the question, how can a person guard himself? Again, I think the question is, how can you guard yourself against the evil inclination? The Holy One, blessed is he, says, you made him evil. Why? For when you were a child, you did not sin, but when you grew up, you sinned. This is sort of like what Paul says, if you remember from Romans, I think it was Romans. When I was a child, I didn't sin, but when the Torah came, when the law came, in other words, when he became bar mitzvah, old enough to be subject to the laws of Torah, that's where the sin came in, because now he could break the commandment because he was subject to the commandments. It's a similar line of argument here. How many things are there in the world which are even more harsh than the evil inclination and more bitter than it, yet you sweeten them? There's nothing more bitter than the lupine, which is a kind of bean that's native to the Mediterranean area. Yet you persevere to boil it in water in order to sweeten it 7 times till it becomes sweet. The same goes for mustard and caper and many other such things. For us, maybe it's like an onion. Most people wouldn't take a big bite out of an onion, but cut it up in little pieces and fry it in butter for 15 minutes, and all of a sudden it tastes real good. So you can sweeten the bitter things that I created for your own use, all the more so the evil inclination, which is in your control. And so that's, again, reflects an attitude in Judaism toward the Yetzer Hara, which isn't to get rid of it or banish it, but control it. Control it. You know, Judaism is not asceticism. Asceticism is sort of foreign to Judaism to a point. You're not supposed to forego all the pleasures of the world. You're supposed to enjoy them properly within prescribed boundaries. I heard one rabbi say, it's Rabbi Katz, said that Jewish people will be judged for all of the things that they could have enjoyed in this world but chose not to, that were permissible. And he said, you can even get the delicious combination of milk and meat together in a permissible way by preparing and eating the udder of a cow properly. So it's the Yetzer Hara says, you know, eat, and so it's okay to eat, which is just the right, you know, it's for a Jewish person, you got to be kosher food, and you can only have enough to live, not like, you know, so much that you throw up afterward, you know, overdo it. So you know, or marital relations, you know, there's a time and a place and a person where it's okay. So it's controlling the evil inclination rather than foregoing all the pleasures of this world.
Like Solomon.
Solomon went a little too far, didn't he? So now the Torah is going to give some examples of something that some people that or should have been good but corrupted themselves, sort of like the evil inclination was supposed to be for our benefit, but we corrupted it by listening to what it's told us to do. These are 3 people that we find in the prophets. And then we have a midrash about Hadrian again. So first we have Hiram. We have Hiram, king of Tzor. Right, this is Hiram, king of Tyre. You probably have seen it, king of Tyre. Anyone know where Tyre is? Nobody? So this was up at by Lebanon. It's gonna talk about him again, and it's gonna say that he was between the Adriatic Sea and the ocean, but it wasn't. Tyre was if you go to Lebanon today, which is just north of the land of Israel, there's a city that used to be an island in the Mediterranean Sea And Hiram, king of Tyre, ruled from there. He ruled over a big, substantial number of people and resources, and the ocean as well. Tyre was like ruled the Mediterranean. They had they were a great power on the sea, and his palace was on an island. And at a certain point, Alexander the Great, you all remember him. Alexander the Great was on his way through conquering just about everything. Got to Tyre, the king holed up on the island and said, hey. And Alexander had his people get a bunch of dirt and build up from the ocean floor or the sea floor all the way out to make a land bridge. So he turned the island into a peninsula. It's still a peninsula today because Alexander the Great built, and his armies built a land bridge out to the city of Tyre. So this guy here, I'm king of Tyre. There's this whole passage in Ezekiel 28 about this guy. And it says about him, you were perfect in your ways from the day of your creation. A lot of Christians interpret this as being actually about Satan and the fall of Satan. This Midrash, of course, does not interpret it just as being about Hiram, king of Tyre. So Hiram, king of Tyre, it says this wonderful thing about him. He was perfect in his ways from the day of his creation, but ultimately evil was found in him and he was banished. He's going to talk about him a little later too. Ultimately, evil was, and regarding the generation of the dispersion, it is written, the dispersion, in other words, the Tower of Babel, where everyone was dispersed all over the world. It's formerly everyone lived together and now we're dispersed all over the world. That generation, regarding them, it's written, the whole earth was of one language. Later, they wished to rise up to the heavens, as it is stated, come, let us build a city for ourselves. What's written there? Hashem descended to see the city and the tower which the people have built. The Midrash says, such a belt was built from, or made from such leather. In other words, all the people of the world all together working toward a common goal, speaking the same language, you'd think they would do something good. But no. This can be compared to a king who made a golden idol in his image and placed it at the entrance to his palace, and a bird crapped on it. Similarly, the Holy One, blessed is he, made a person upright, but his evil inclination went and sullied him. Again, the implication is because we allowed it to. Similarly, it states, yet I said, you are as angels, all of you are sons of the Most High. Actually, the verse, I think, says Elohim, and you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High. Psalm 82. Jesus quotes this psalm. The Pharisees, and he's in John, John. You guys do the Jesus, my Rabbi. This I just edited this chapter of John. You'll probably be doing it in November, December. There's this Midrash on Psalm 82. So Psalm 82, if you read it, God is talking to the heavenly court. He's talking to angels. He says, you guys are created to be like gods. You're like sons of the Most High. These angels are such a higher level. But then he says, you're going to die like men. So now the Midrash interprets that passage as referring to the children of Israel. And not this particular Midrash, but I think it's in Midrash Rabbah, says that when the children of Israel accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai, they became like angels. They became like immortal beings. And then when they worshiped the calf, they lost that. And then they became mortal again. And so we're all going to have to die. So again, the commonality here is we were created to be upright and righteous and immortal, but because of our sin, we end up having to die. And it quotes that Ezekiel passage again about Hiram. It says, Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre, so said my master God, because you are arrogant and have said, I am almighty, I have sat in a seat of God. In reference to this, Ecclesiastes 5:1 says, do not be rash with your mouth. Let your heart not hasten to utter a word before God. Similarly, Proverbs 17:19. The one who loves betrayal loves contention, and one who raises his mouth arrogantly seeks disaster. So you got to be careful what you say. Don't say anything inappropriate. Someone who speaks inappropriate words, God will break that person apart. Come and see, the weakest of weak from above is victorious against the mightiest of below. For it's stated in Judges 9:53, a certain woman threw down part of an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Let's go, Abimelech, big strong man. And this woman, she's not going to be able to beat him, but she's up higher, drop a rock on his head, crush his skull. You got the height advantage. How much more God, who is above us, and he's not weak, he's super powerful. He can just,
Wow, so. Smallest one.
yeah.
That's still.
So after Andronicus, the king of Edom, vanquished the entire world, he went to Rome. So again, Edom is code for Rome, because it says right here, he went to Rome. And Andronicus is Hadrian. So Hadrian, the king of Rome, vanquished the entire world and then went to Rome. He said to the staff of his palace, I want you to make me into a deity, for I have vanquished the entire world. They said to him, you have yet to rule over his city and his house, Jerusalem and the Holy Temple. So he went and accomplished that by destroying the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and exiling Israel, and then he returned to Rome. So this is interesting. I'm going to point out the problem here with the Midrash. Hadrian destroying the temple and returning to Rome. Anyone know enough history? So the temple was destroyed around the year 70 by Titus, who then became emperor. Titus and Hadrian are two different guys. Hadrian and his exile of the Jews from Jerusalem was a different thing that happened 65 years later, the end of the Second Jewish War, 135 AD. So this is kind of interesting. It's what seems to have happened here, and I think what we might be able to learn from this error in the Midrash, is that the Hadrianic persecution of the Jewish people after the Second Jewish War was so bad and so extensive and left such a mark on the Jewish people that looking back, they also attributed the destruction of the temple to that guy, even though it was somebody else that came before him. You see this actually happen a lot today. Like people will get mad at Donald Trump for something that was already happening before he was president, and he just kept doing. Or people get mad at Barack Obama for something that he did. It was something that started before him, and he just kept doing. We just decide, we find the person we don't like, and then we just think they did all the stuff we don't like, but even if it was already happening beforehand. So this attributes Hadrian for destroying the temple, which is an error. But again, it's a midrash. It's just a story to teach a lesson. So Hadrian comes back to Rome and says, now I destroyed his house, I raised his sanctuary and exiled his people, so make me into a god, make me into a deity. Rabbi Berachia said, Hadrian had three philosophers. The first philosopher said to him, a person does not rebel against his king in his own palace, but only outside of it. So leave his palace and you will be deified. By the way, he created everything. He created heaven and earth. So you have to leave his palace, leave his heaven and earth, and then you can be deified. The second one said, you can't become a god. For so he said to his prophets, so shall you say to them, the gods who did not make the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from beneath these heavens. It's Jeremiah 10, verse 11. So the second one just said, can't do it. Even if you became a god, he'd kill you. And the third one said, I beg of you, come to my aid at this time. And Hadrian said, what's the problem? The guy says, I got a ship out there in the sea, being tossed by a storm, and all my treasures are on it. And Hadrian said, oh, it's no problem. I'll send my legions out to rescue the ship. And he said, oh, you don't got to do that. Don't trouble yourself with all that. Just send some wind. Hadrian said, where am I going to get some wind? And the guy says, you can't even send wind. How can you become a god? And it's written concerning the actual God. So said the Almighty, Hashem, the creator of the heavens, and the one who stretched them forth, who spread out the earth and its produce, who gave a soul to the people on it and a spirit to those who walk on it. What does that verse have to do with anything? The Hebrew word translated spirit is ruach, which means wind or breath. So Hadrian got upset, went home, and his wife said, those people misled you, for you can become a god. You are a great and mighty king, and everything is under your control. But I'll say to you one thing, return his deposit, and you will become a god. He said, what is his deposit? She said, the soul. He said, if my soul departs, what am I going to do? She said, you have no control over the soul within you. And it's written, man is powerless over the spirit to restrain the spirit. And there is no authority on the day of death. Again, Ecclesiastes, this time chapter 8, verse 8. So how can you become a god? You're a man, not a god. Now the Holy One, blessed is he, said, I revive the dead, and Elijah revived the dead. But he didn't say he was the Almighty. I bring down the rains, and Elijah brought down the rains. I stopped the rains, and Elijah stopped the rains. Remember from 1 Kings 17, when Elijah stopped the rains? I brought down fire and sulfur on Sodom. Elijah brought down fire on Mount Carmel. But he never said he was the Almighty. But you, Hadrian, say, I'm Almighty, and sat in the seat of God. You might argue that you've lived a long time, but God has lived and will live at the resurrection of the dead. His throne is of fiery flames, and Elijah rode a chariot of fiery flames. It's the connection between a throne and a chariot. Probably Ezekiel, the first couple chapters, when Ezekiel sees a big Merkava, right? The chariot of God. And what's on the chariot of God is a big throne. It's a mobile throne. The chariot's like a mobile throne. So that's the connection between a throne and a chariot, probably. It's written concerning God that his path is in a tempest and a storm, and Elijah ascended to heaven in a tempest. But he never said he was God. In fact, he got depressed and asked God to kill him after he was being pursued by Ahab out in the wilderness, and he thought he was the only Israelite left that was not an idolater, and he said, just kill me. But Hadrian said he was the Almighty. Jonah descended into the sea, as it is written, you cast me into the depth and the heart of the seas. But ultimately, he also requested that his soul die. But Hadrian, you say that you're Almighty and you've sat in the seat of God in the heart of the seas. And then the Midrash takes this idea of people building palaces on water and just runs with it. It says, come and see, anyone who wished to make himself into a god built himself a palace in the water. A palace in the water. First I thought different, but then I thought, oh, what about yachts? What do really rich people do now? They buy yachts. They can float around in luxury. I don't know if that's the same thing as this, but that's what I thought of. Pharaoh built himself a palace in the water and sealed up the waters of the Nile to prevent them running into the sea. The waters then piled up and they lifted the palace, raising it high up, as it is stated. Speak and say, so says my master God, see, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great serpent, who said, my river is mine own and I've made myself mighty. This is Ezekiel 29, actually. Ezekiel 29 is an oracle against Pharaoh. And so this is obviously not literal. There's not a palace floating on water in Egypt, but it's a midrash. Finding these little connections between people and water and taking them literally to make a point. The Holy One, blessed is he, said to him, you evil one, you prided yourself in water, so you shall die by water, as it is written, he threw Pharaoh and his army in the sea of reeds, the Red Sea. Sennacherib here. Sennacherib. Remember Sennacherib? He was the guy who destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel and brought them into exile in 721 BC. King of Assyria. Sennacherib. Bad news, Sennacherib. Sennacherib made himself a palace strategically located by the Lebanon between two high mountains. Springs came forth from the mountains and suspended his palace upon high. As it is stated, look, Asher was a cedar in Lebanon. Water nurtured it, the depths raised it up. Ezekiel 31. Asher is Assyria. It might be Ashur, would be a better way to say it, to not get confused with Asher, my son, Asher, the tribe.
So could you compare that to Yeshua walking on water?
Maybe a demonstration of power, being able to walk on water. That'd be a slight connection. Similarly, it states, and it became beautiful in its stature, and the length of its tendrils for its roots were upon abundant waters. It's the same as Ezekiel 31, all this stuff about Sennacherib. Similarly, it states Ezekiel 37, I dug and drank water. What became of Sennacherib? He died. Ezekiel 31:15, on the day he descended to the grave. So these guys think so much of themselves, the great big palaces on water, and they all die. Everybody dies. These people think they're so great and they'll last forever. But they die just like everybody else. That goes back to Hiram, king of Tyre, built this great fortified island. And Ezekiel has another prophecy against this guy. So it's Ezekiel 26:17. They will take up a dirge about you, a sad song about you, and say of you, how have you perished, the one established from the seas. He began saying, Ezekiel 28:2, I am Almighty, I have sat in the seat of God in the heart of the seas. And God says back to him, when I make you a ruined city like the cities that have not been inhabited, when I bring up the depths over you and abundant waters cover you, I shall lower you with those who descend to the pit, with peoples of bygone times, and I shall settle you in a land of the netherworld. This is all in Ezekiel 26. And the land of the netherworld, the Midrash says, refers to Gehenna. Similarly, it says, you were a great sheltering cherub. And as I gave this to you, you were upon the holy mountain of God. You walked among fiery stones. This is again Ezekiel 28. But, he's still dying. Now with Israel, it says in Isaiah 43:2, when you pass through water, I'm with you. So the water's not going to cover Israel's head and kill them. Israel can survive being passing through water. So that's kind of interesting. Water there, I wonder if there's a deeper significance to the water, building palaces on water and yet dying, drowning, as Israel can pass through the sea and survive. All right, the next Midrash begins on Genesis 3:22, which I think is the same verse. It doesn't have the whole verse here. The Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. Now lest he put out his hand and take also the tree of life and live forever. Therefore God sent him out of the garden. Midrash begins, teach us, our master, if someone relates to Lashon Hara, evil speech, what is his punishment? So do our rabbis teach. One who relates evil speech is worse than one who commits a deed, an evil deed. So this is opposite of what you would think. You would think saying something bad about somebody is pretty bad, but stalking them one is even worse. Or like under our laws in any other country, basically, hitting someone or stealing something from them is worse than saying something bad about them. But there's a sense in which, at least a sense in which, evil speech is worse than doing something bad to somebody, because the decree against our forefathers in the wilderness was sealed only because of evil speech. When was this? When the spies came back. The 10 spies had the evil report about the land. Because of their evil report about the land, and no one did anything. It was just their speech was enough to seal the decree that they had to wander for 40 years in the wilderness. Rabbi Monod Sho said in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, the person does not speak evil speech unless he denies the foundation of our faith. As it is stated, with our tongue we will prevail, our lips are with us, who is master over us? Psalm 12:5. I guess the implication there is that if to prevail, you have to prevail with your tongue and your lips. You can fail by using them in the wrong way. That must be what it means there. And using that, yeah, it's not 100% clear to me what his line of argument is. That's going to happen a few times here in the Midrash. The rabbis say the evil speech is severe, for it led to the death of Adam. How? Well, if the snake came and lied, or said to Adam and Eve, God knows on the day you eat of it, the tree of knowledge, that your eyes will be opened. The Midrash expands on what the snake says here. The Midrash says the snake told Adam that God ate from this tree and then created the world. And every craftsman hates other people who are in the same trade. So God just doesn't want you to be able to eat the tree and create your own universes. Yeah, nobody likes competition. Wouldn't you like to be the only guy in town and charge whatever you want? So if you eat the fruit, you'll be like God. And so they listened to the snake, and that was the cause of death for themselves and all the progeny until the end of all generations. And Midrash makes a comparison between the word hen in this verse and the word hen in Deuteronomy 31:14, where it talks about Moses, his days were drawing near to die. It uses the same word, Hebrew word hen, which is usually translated indeed. So it says here, indeed. Man will, it spells out their fate after saying this word indeed. The connection being that even righteous people like Moses have to die because of this sin of eating the fruit, which means it must be everyone else too. If even Moses has to die, it must mean we're all going to have to die.
So if you went up to somebody and hit them in the face, that's not as bad as saying something bad about it?
So there is a sense in which, right? There's a sense in which, so the actual penalty under the Torah for evil speech, it's not specified, which is why it says here in the Midrash, someone asks, what's the punishment for evil speech? The Torah doesn't say you have to go do something or pay money or whatever it is. Whereas if you attack someone, there is a penalty specified in the Torah. You have to pay their bills and so forth. Which is why the rabbis had to say, well, there's a sense in which it's even worse. You have to be very careful that even though the Torah doesn't specify a punishment, you have to be very careful of it. The sense in which it's worse can be illustrated. It was illustrated by one rabbi with this advice that he gave, right? So a guy came to the rabbi and said, you don't know this, but I've been bad-mouthing you all around town, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry and try to make it right, and make it right. And in the Torah, there's a way you can make it right from stealing something. You give back a certain amount plus a certain amount. So, I've been bad-mouthing you, I want to make it right. So how can I make it right? And the rabbi says, well, first, go get a pillow. Okay, go get a pillow. And the rabbi says, now go out in the middle of town, take a knife, slice the pillow up and shake all the feathers out. And the guy doesn't, he shows the feathers back, comes back with the pillowcase and says, all right, now what? And the rabbi says, I'll go collect all the feathers. The guy says, there's no way I'm going to be able to collect every feather. The rabbi says, well, there's no way you're going to be able to make it right after saying bad things about it. That's one of the senses in which saying bad things about someone is worse than hitting. If you hit them, yeah, once you hit somebody, they'll probably get better. The body will heal, and if you knock their eye out, you pay for their eye, and whatever the courts establish is a righteous judgment. Eventually, it's supposed to be everything's evened out, everything's, but when you say something bad about somebody, there's nothing you can do to make it right. You can't take it back. You can't, if someone thinks less of the person you were talking about now that you've said that, you can't go fix that. They're always going to have that in their head. You can't get it out of their head.
So the spiritual or the inner man is more, well, how can I say it? It's more important than the body.
Well, this is, I think, even a little more practical than that. It's just the idea that ruining someone's reputation can be more harmful than even doing something physical to them. You can, because it can destroy their livelihood. People won't go, people won't hire them or whatever. It can end up being more harmful than stealing from them, even, or something like that. Even though you wouldn't necessarily think so while you're talking about them, it can be more harmful than. The inner spiritual dimension would be we shouldn't think poorly about people. So where does evil speech about someone come from? It's probably because we don't like them, and that's like a deeper problem that we need to address. Why don't we like somebody?
It's like a hard issue.
Yeah. So these things can be traced back to a deeper problem. Jesus says, "Out of the heart is where the mouth speaks." Right? Where do you get all the stuff you say? It comes from inside your heart. If you can fix that, then that really helps with the problem of what you say. If you can't fix that, at least try to fix what you say. Okay, so now we're going to Genesis 4:3. After a period of time, which is just one Hebrew word. Miketz, after a period of time. After how long? Miketz doesn't specify after how long. The Midrash says sometimes Miketz is at the end of a year, sometimes Miketz is at the end of a couple of years, sometimes Miketz is at the end of days, and sometimes Miketz is at the end of 40 years. Which one is it? Well, the sages said Cain and Abel were 40 years old. Cain brought from Pre-Ha'adamah, the Pre-Ha'adamah, from the fruit of the ground. Reminds me of a stand-up comedian talking about hairs. Here we are, we've been out here digging up your fruit. Fruit of the ground. What fruit? In the ground. That's a fruit. Fruit like a pear from the ground. Usually fruit comes from a bush or a tree, right? You expect fruit from a tree or a bush. We don't expect fruit to come up from the ground, reach down and pick up an apple. So because of the odd wording there, it's fruit, but it's also from the ground. The rabbis determined that what Cain brought was flax seed. And it doesn't say he brought from the first of the fruit of the ground. So he brought his leftover flax seed. Leftover flax seed. Abel brought from the firstborn of his sheep and from their fat. What commandment in the Torah do you think may have been, it's going to tell us here in a second, but what can you think of a commandment that relates flax and sheep in some way? What is flax? What can you make from flax? From the fibrous stalk of the flax plant? Linen.
Yeah.
What can you make from sheep?
Wool.
Wool.
It's wool and wool.
Don't mix wool and linen. Why? Because the Midrash says, don't wear shatnez, don't wear a mixture of wool and linen, because it's not proper. The offering of a sinner should be mixed with the offering of an innocent one. Therefore, wool and linen together is forbidden. In Genesis 4:8, it says, Cain said to Abel, his brother. And the way that it reads here, it sort of sounds like he didn't just say the next thing that is there in the verse. It sounds like he had a conversation with him, and then at the end of it, he said this other thing. What did he say to Abel? What did he say to Abel? He said, Midrash says, he said, let us divide the world. Adam presumably owned the whole world, and then Cain and Abel had to split it up. Were they not expecting Adam to have any more children? The Midrash says that, based on if you keep reading, you find out Adam was 130 years old or something before he had Seth. So this has been, over 40 years. Adam hasn't had any more children. Cain's assuming Adam's not going to have any more children. So he says to Abel, let's split our inheritance, split the world. And Cain says, since I'm the firstborn, I'll take a double portion. And Abel says, huh? Cain says, I want to take an extra portion on top of my portion. And my extra portion is going to be the place where your sacrifice was accepted. Why does Cain want that area specifically? Maybe because he's jealous. He doesn't want Abel to go back there and make more successful sacrifices. He thought maybe it was the place. Could have been because this was the site of the Holy Temple. The connection the Midrash makes there is that in Genesis here it says that this all happened while they were in the field. That same word field shows up again in Jeremiah 26:18, where it says that the Zion, or the temple, will be plowed over like a field. But so the Midrash has them arguing over this spot because it's the site that the temple will be built on. Maybe because they thought that they would live long enough to see the temple built, or maybe because this site was already considered holy. Because again, in Jewish tradition, the site of the Holy Temple is the center of the world. The center of the world. It's the rock. There's a rock underneath the Temple Mount from which God created the rest of the world. So the Temple Mount has an inherent holiness to it. So Cain wanted that as part of his inheritance. Others say that Cain said to Abel, let us divide the world. And Abel said, all right. So Abel took his sheep, Cain took the land to work it, and they stipulated between them that neither one should have any claim against the other. So, but then Cain followed Abel, where Abel was pasturing his sheep. Cain would follow him and pursue him. And finally, Abel got fed up and they started fighting, but Abel was actually stronger. Abel overcame Cain. Cain fell down under him. And Cain realized he was going to lose the fight and said, have mercy, don't harm me. So Abel has mercy on him, but then Cain stood up and killed him. Where does it get all this? Well, Genesis 4:8 says Cain rose up and struck his brother Abel. Rose up from what? Maybe because he got knocked down first. But Abel had mercy and didn't take advantage.
Is there any sources that's not of the Bible that talks about their spat?
Well, this would be one. So that's what we're reading. Yeah, there's Midrashim or like expansions of that story are going to be all over the place. I'm sure there's some in Midrash Rabbah, there's probably some in the Talmud. To collect them all would be a job. So you just sort of kind of get them when they show up. After he killed him, he said, I'll run away from my father and mother, for they will seek to avenge him only from me, because there wasn't anyone else in the whole world. So they'll know who did it by process of elimination. Thereupon the Holy One, blessed is he, revealed himself to him and said, you can escape from your parents, but you can't escape from me. As it is said in Jeremiah, which was going to be written thousands of years later, can a man hide in secret places that I not see him? He said to him, where's Abel, your brother? And he said, woe, God said again to Cain, woe for him, for he took pity on you and did not kill you when you fell into him, and then you got up and killed him. We'll continue this conversation later.